morning, dear friends, and welcome to this module. In the previous module, we had introduced the concept of digital humanities. We had discussed how digital humanities, or DH, shapes the digital models of scholarly discourse. DH has generated the shift in reading practices, leading to a democratization and curation of knowledge. Today, we will focus on DH and literary studies. We will look at a range of approaches for the digital quantification of literary style using visualization techniques to understand new ways of conceiving narratives, digital approaches to literary geography, and what the continued presence of digital methods might mean for literary studies today. In short, we will be talking about what constitutes literary data and what is the role of the literary within quotes in the digital humanities. However, before discussing it, it is important to understand the origin and development of the digital humanities. It will help us in exploring how technology can be leveraged to advance humanistic inquiry. The origin of DH reaches back to the 1930s and 1940s. Italian Jesuit scholar and philosopher Roberto Busa is known for his pioneering work in this field. Roberto Busa had received certain funding and also technological collaboration with the help of IBM, and he had created the Index Thomisticus project. It was the world's first sizable machine readable corpus that contained an index verbatim of the writings by and about Thomas Aquinas. In all, it had contained 137 pieces of writings. The canonical term digital humanities emerged and developed from its competing alternative, that is, humanities computing. The latter is restricted to the application of computers in humanities scholarship and had narrower technical goals, while the digital humanities as a term incorporated a humanities of the digital, including the study of digitally created sources such as art and literature. DH is profoundly multidisciplinary. It attracts contributions from scholars and scientists both within and outside the humanities. Digital humanities is profoundly multidisciplinary. It attracts contributions from scholars and scientists both within and outside the humanities as well as the humanistic social sciences. Digital humanities have taken care to define themselves in an inclusive rather than an exclusive manner. The 1990s were a pivotal period for it. The advent of the World Wide Web and the availability of powerful personal computers opened up new possibilities for the digitization and analysis of human data. Projects like Perseus Digital Library or the William Blake Archive, which we have discussed in the previous modules, serve as examples for this. The Text Coding Initiative, TEI, founded in 1987, developed a standard for decoding texts in a machine readable format. Although historically the digital humanities have been dominated by text oriented paradigms, the community is increasingly engaging with multimodal research objects and methods. We can look at three different and specific turns: the visual, the spatial, and the sonic turn. The visual turn is to engage with large data sets and to represent them in a visual manner. The spatial turn suggests the strategic use of digital mapping, which is directed towards graphic analysis of location, ownership, and distribution within geographic boundaries. The sonic turn represents the idea that the studies of sound are strongly linked to heritage and conservation, often focusing on capturing of the songs, music and sounds of our cultural environments. In the figure on the right hand side of the slide, you can look at the examples of each one. An example of the visual aspect is a DH initiative manuscript link that aims to construct virtual medieval libraries by collaborating with collections around the world. The Geographic Information System or GIS technologies provide ways to map and compare spatial data. And online forums like Sounding Out provides space for publication, posts, discussion, and recordings. A particular point which we must notice is that in the digital humanities, the traditional print publication forms are still there. They have not ceased to exist, but they are often complemented and supported by electronic formats. Therefore, we can think of DH as the ways in which digital world is impacting the ways in which we think about the text versus hypertext. This is what Professor Rahul Krishna Gairola of the Department of Postcolonial Studies and Digital Humanities at Murdoch University, Australia, explains in his following video.
From Perth, Western Australia, my name is Dr. Rahul Krishna Gairola, and I am the Krishna Summers Senior Lecturer in English and Postcolonial Studies at Murdoch University here in Australia. I'm delighted today to be joining you from here all the way to Roorkee to talk a little bit about the meaning of digital humanities. Now, the digital humanities, it's debatable how long it's been around. Some would say that it goes back as far as into the 1940s when IBM was working with the Nazis to create the punch card system that would lead to the extermination of over 1 million Jews during World War II. Some people see digital humanities as a more recent phenomenon, and what I would say is that the digitization and mechanization of human life has been a defining aspect of our generation since, well, before my generation even, the previous generation, since World War II, because we saw a lot of mechanization and the invention of certain weapons and chemicals that we'd never seen before. This is also true in terms of the explosion of technology around not just warfare, but also technologies of erasing life from Earth. That said, we could roughly say that the digital humanities has arisen in academia as a field in the past 15, 20 years, and there are some very important texts that define digital humanities. Perhaps the most one of the most important ones is this one, Defining Digital Humanities, a reader, and it it offers us many different definitions for what the digital humanities is and why it's important. A more recent volume is from 2018, and it is Disrupting the Digital Humanities, and it actually challenges the kinds of ways in which we've thought about digital humanities in the dominant sense. More recently, there have been new articulations of the digital humanities. For example, post-colonial digital humanities and queer digital humanities, and these are all different ways of thinking about how various lenses of identity force us to rethink the meaning of human agency in the digital milieu and the ways in which technology is shaping human life, and even more so now that we've come out of a 3-year global pandemic. In terms of my own definition, which is something that students and colleagues and professors all over the world ask me, how would I define digital humanities? Well, if we just look at the two terms, the first term is digital, the second term is the humanities. Therefore, for me, the way in which I would define the digital humanities is the ways in which the digital world is impacting and reshaping the ways in which we think of the traditional humanities, and for English majors, the ways we even think about the text versus the hypertext. And conversely, the ways in which the humanities is impacting the digital world. And in that sense, it's a synergistic and mutual reciprocal relationship wherein the digital is impacting the ways we think about what is human, and what is human is indeed impacting the ways in which we think about the digital. Now, nowhere is this more evident today than in the current arguments and debates about the use of AI or ChatGPT, ongoing anxieties that people have that robots will continue to take human jobs, and ongoing arguments against this, that there are some jobs that robots and AI simply cannot fulfill because they lack the empathy, compassion, and emotions, and indeed EQ, emotional intelligence, that human beings have. I hope that was helpful for a first definition of digital humanities. And in the next short video, I will offer a definition of post-colonial digital humanities. Thank you for listening.
While the origin of digital humanities can be traced back to the mid 20th century, it has significantly evolved over the years and found particular resonance in fields like literary studies, where scholars employ computational techniques for distant reading and other innovative approaches to analyze and interpret texts. The study of literature with the aid of computers is undoubtedly controversial. Proponents of DH have explicated the possibilities for broad scale literary analysis, which extends beyond the limitations of readings made by the finite human lifespan. They also attempt to better understand the genres and forms through visualization and specialization. They also focus on fresh perspectives and methods which might be important for rethinking core theoretical assumptions about literature itself. Within DH and literary studies, a notable methodology that has gained prominence is known as distant reading. That is a computational approach to literary analysis that allows scholars to examine large corpora of texts for patterns and trends. This term was coined by Franco Moretti. It refers to the method of literary analysis that involves the analysis of extensive corpora of texts using computational tools and techniques. It often involves examining texts in their historical and geographical context and focuses on the macroscopic view of literature, which involves the recognition that literary history is not an exhausted, well mapped field but is still an uncharted expanse. This approach is helpful in revealing broader cultural and societal trends. Moretti claims that within the plot and the soliloquies of Hamlet, for example, specific nodes make visible specific regions which further enable experimentation. To further elaborate the importance of distant reading, Moretti gives the example of Victorian fiction. We might know George Eliot from George Meredith, but what about the 60,000 other novels of the 19th century that did not make it to the canon of Victorian fiction? And this is where distant reading proves its functionality. It expands the sample size of text through macroanalysis. Moretti has used the phrase slaughterhouse of literature as a metaphor to describe this process of analysis. So, Franco Moretti's slaughterhouse of literature is basically a metaphor which is used to describe the process of systematically analyzing a large corpus of literature for the purpose of extracting broader patterns and insights using computational methods. He has developed a coding scheme to describe the role of clues in detective fiction. He read a sample of 20 stories, taking notes on the presence or absence of each aspect of clues in order to sort the stories into a tree and to map the genesis of detective fiction. He illustrates it further by analyzing the different bifurcations which are visible. The first bifurcation occurs when the rivals of Arthur Conan Doyle use no clues at all, and all these writers are completely forgotten. The second bifurcation occurs when readers must have discovered clues and writers must have understood that these curious details were popular. However, some writers like Blothby and Hume However, some writers like Boothby and Hume placed clues with no function and necessity. The third bifurcation occurs when clues are present They have a function but are not visible in the course of the story, and we lose rivals like Pirkis, Botkin, and Growler. The fourth bifurcation occurs when clues are decodable by the reader also. It is very interesting to note that based on the use of clues in these stories, most of the detective novels of Doyle do not make it up to the fourth bifurcation. Distant reading allows us to understand that Doyle proceeds by a method of trial and error and that he stumbled upon the clues while he was working at something different. Doyle uses these clues as a support for Sherlock Holmes' omniscience. Moretti's distant reading has had a significant impact in shaping how scholars approach literature from a computational and quantitative perspective. But when it comes to stylometric analysis or the study of authorship attribution, it is Matthew Jocker's methodology of macroanalysis that is widely used. Locker's idea of microanalytic approach helps us to see and understand the options of a larger literary economy and the degree to which literature in the individual author respond to or react against literary and cultural trends. Macroanalysis offers specific insights into the historical place of texts in authors, literary patterns and lexicons employed over time, the cultural and societal forces that impact literary style, and the waxing and waning of literary schemes. It also provides a practical method for approaching questions on whether literature is evolutionary, whether there are stylistic patterns inherent to particular genres, or whether literary trends correlate with historical events. At its most basic, microanalytic approach is a method of gathering bits of information that may have escaped our attention because of the sheer multitude of texts out there. Let us look at an example of macroanalysis of literary theme in the American writer Herman Melville's famous 1851 novel Moby Dick and how Joker regards it as an outlier by examining a corpus of almost 3,500 19th century novels through computational methods. Two most important things we have to look out for here are topic modeling and word cloud, which we have already discussed in the previous module. Topic models provide ways to analyze large volumes of unlabeled text. Using contextual clues, it can connect words with similar meanings and distinguish between uses of words with multiple meanings. The topics in a given collection of texts are not provided as a set of themes, but rather as a set of words which are ranked or weighed according to their probabilities of appearing together in a given topic. Joker visualizes topic word distribution as word clouds to derive the keywords of Moby Dick that are central to the topic. The keywords are labeled as the top 10 topics in Moby Dick. For example, the presence of topic seas and whaling, a theme dealing with islands and sea voyages, is prominent in Moby Dick. This is followed by topics like boats and ships that deal with themes like captains and crews. The darker gray bars in the diagram represent a corpus of 3,500 19th century themes of novels that are barely noticeable. This proves how Moby Dick was an outlier in terms of the themes that dominate this 19th century corpus. If we look at the top 10 topics from the overall corpus given on the right hand side of the diagram on the slide, with the exception of themes associated with morning and night, the themes that dominate the overall corpus are completely foreign to Moby Dick, making it an outlier in terms of themes that dominate the 19th century corpus. This also explains the reason why the novel was not very well received at the time of its publication. We will look at one more aspect from Joker's macroanalysis, which is literary influence. Whether consciously influenced by a predecessor or not, every book is in some sense connected to those before it through a shared pool of stylistic and thematic material. Before we look further into the macro analysis of literary influence, we must also understand the difference which is there between nodes and edges. Nodes are the individual books, and edges are the distance between them circulated with the Euclidean metric. Nodes with smaller distance are more similar and more closely connected. So let us look at the first diagram. The book notes are colored according to the publication year of the books. The lighter gray nodes indicate work from the earlier parts of the century, and the darker nodes represent the later. Books are being pulled together based on the similarity of their compound stylistic and thematic distances from each other. Interestingly, they also line up in a chronological alignment that reveals the thematic and stylistic change which occurs over the time. If we look at the second figure, we find that the network layout is reshaded according to author gender in the 19th century novels. Male nodes and edges are colored lighter gray, whereas female nodes are black. Works by female authors are more stylistically and thematically similar to each other, and they cluster together in the south. Males are drawn together in the north. Three outlier communities are also visible. The outlier community at the lower right corner belongs to books authored by Margaret Oliphant, who has a unique stylistic signal which is unusual both within her gender and to the network as a whole. A clear boundary thus can be seen which divides the network into male and female regions. At the same time, we find that there are male authors who have been placed firmly within the female dominated regions of the graph and vice versa. Thus, computer visualizations help us to verify the claims made by digital and quantitative scholarship. David McClure, the technical director of the Stanford Literary Lab, delineates how the distribution of words inside a text can have a strong thematic focus using kernel density estimate metric. In his 2014 work, Mental Maps of Text, David McClure delineates how words are distributed inside texts. The distribution of certain words can have a strong semantic focus, and they tend to hang together with the other words that orbit around a shared topic. He also explains that the type of clustering where words tend to gravitate around a central point can be captured in a kernel density estimate metric. He notes how words are distributed in Tolstoy's War and Peace. Algorithm manages to cluster portions of the narrative together in terms that make sense for the plot based on linguistic similitude. Napoleon as the man winning battles appears along the gradient between battles and history. Bonaparte, representative of the Russian imagination of the man, appears along the gradient between war and peace. This plotting is a type of deformance that forms the structural thematic outline of the novel. This plotting has been termed as deformance. Why? Because it deforms the original text into a now reshaped one. Another area where we can use computational visualization is in the version variance of contemporary fiction. Variance in different versions goes unremarked until academic work catches on. Let us look at David Mitchell's novel Cloud Atlas to understand how visualization plays its role to understand the textual variance. Cloud Atlas has two versions, the UK Scepter edition and the USA Random House edition. When we compare the textual variations of these two versions, we find that most of the changes primarily occur in the section titled An Orison of Sonmi 451, which is an interview with a death penalty convict in a standard question answer format. Visualization helps us to understand how the novel has been reordered and how the text has been moved around, cut and edited in the two versions. This type of diagram consisting of pathways is called a Sankey diagram. The column on the left represents the UK Scepter edition and that on the right is the US Random House version. Joint lines between the editions represent contiguous blocks of consistent and shared material. The white space represents instances where there is no correlative block in one or the other of the texts. For example, it is given in the UK edition, how did you respond? And in the USA, the text reads, how did you respond to such blasphemous hubris? These two pieces of text do the same thing in terms of narrative progression and so are marked as functionally equivalent. Digital humanities practices have often become involved in ideas of mapping with respect to literary and historical texts. Digital mapping approaches like the Geographic Information Systems or GIS and allows for deeper understanding of the chronologies in literary texts. The model of literary analysis that drew particular attention to the spatial practices in literature and reading maps of literary cartography came to be called as Geocriticism. Digital humanities use GIS to map out quantitative data and to visualize and interpret geographical research. Cooper and Gregory, in their article Mapping the English Lake District, a Literary GIS, subdivide the practice of literary cartography into two principal categories: writerly mapping and readerly mapping. Writerly mapping refers to the ways in which an author explicitly explores the relationship between cartography and textuality. Readerly mapping denotes the ways in which an individual may recalibrate this relationship between textual and cartographic representations of geographical spaces through the reading process. GIS clearly intersects with readerly mapping, where the individual reader can move between the cartographic and textual representations of space that have been brought together by the writer. Such phenomenological approaches to space emphasize how subjective embeddedness in space contributes to its construction. Mapping the Lakes project maps the Lake District of the English poets Thomas Gray and Coleridge and highlights many of the advantages of working with the GIS. This project has been funded by the British Academy and hosted at the University of Lancaster. It attempts to map the Lake District of the English poets, particularly with reference to Thomas Gray and S.T. Coleridge. It maps out two textual accounts of journeys through the Lake District: Gray's tour of the region in the autumn of 1769 and Coleridge's tour of the area in August 1802. The entire project aimed to construct a spatial narrative by inviting the user to move through a series of experimental and exploratory cartographies. To use GIS maps to document the representation of place across multiple texts and map out the emotional response to landscape. Gray's 1769 tour documents a type of special mobilities of a tourist, whereas Coleridge demonstrates a socio-spatial insiderness that informs his walking tour. Such an inference was taken by assembling the geographical data and then recombining with the already known biographical accounts of Gray and Coleridge. Let us look at Mark Blacklock's 2015 novel I Am Jack that uses cartography and geographic coordinate systems in the same way associated with digital humanities. I Am Jack is primarily a novel about impersonation. The protagonist, Umble, dubbed as Wearside Jack, sent 3 letters to the West Yorkshire Police and the Daily Mirror, impersonated as Peter Sutcliffe or the Yorkshire Ripper. Digital mapping helps to unearth the special metadata from Umble's letter. Various geometries, points of the address, and time signatures of the events in the novel prove why Umble's hoax was so powerful. So, we can look at metadata coordination of the letters of Wearside Jack. The shaded polygon represents the area in which Peter Sutcliffe was operating. Letters were sent by Umble to the 2 circles within the area of Sutcliffe's crime from a place called Sutherland. But the letters were sent from a triangulated portion some 100 miles of north. It is this reverse triangulation that threw detectives off the case of the Yorkshire Ripper, allowing him to roam free. The intersection of literature, geography, cartography, and digital humanities have become increasingly complex. In addition to understanding these concepts, it also becomes important to understand the social forces with which a map is bound with, and this entails what we call as critical cartography. In this slide, let us look at 3 terms. The first is literary geography, the second is literary cartography, and the third is critical cartography. Literary geography demonstrates that spatial dimensions of fictional accounts set along a scale of localizations can actually be a key to understanding the whole plot, and it relates only to the reader. Literary cartography is a subdiscipline to literary geography where spatial elements of fictional text are translated into cartographic symbols, and it concerns the writer only as a map maker. Critical cartography involves a paradigm shift from trusting the map to mistrusting it. It shifts the focus from the map itself to the social forces with which it is bound up. It also aligns with the spatiality of the postmodern, where globalization and forces of capitalism come into force. The geopolitical organization and disruptions in the post war era called attention to this political essence of geography. But how are we able to map literary text, especially those representing fictional realms? Let us analyze this through the project Chronotopic Cartographies. This project is based on the famous Russian literary critic Mikhail Bakhtin's idea of chronotope. Chronotopic Cartographies is a project by Sally Bushell. It was conducted between 2017 to 2020. It investigated how we can use digital tools to analyze, map, and visualizes the spaces of literary texts. It draws on the literary theorist Bakhtin's concept of the chronotope, which is a way of describing how time and place are linked and represented in different spatial forms of literature. The project focuses on 5 spatial types: correspondent places, indefinite spaces, nested worlds, fantastic worlds, and spaces of exile. It is a custom XML schema designed to capture the qualitative, linguistic, and narratological aspects of literary spaces and temporalities. Let us take the example of the spatial type. Correspondent spaces are visualized in Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse also. Bushell analyzes 3 realms: the complete map or suzette, which is the narrative order of the story. Second is the topoi, which suggests the recurring themes, and finally, chronotopes. So, visualization of Woolf's novel belongs to the spatial type of correspondent places. This group of text contains worlds that can be referenced geographically and historically to real world spaces. And Bakhtin has defined these as concrete. The Suzette registers the underlying speciality of the three parts of the novel: the window, time passes, and the lighthouse. The window and the lighthouse are connected by the horizontal line of time, which is made visible as a corridor to us. The middle parts, topoi, are joined by jumps, interruptions, and intratextual connections that imply the prominence of time over space. This all speaks for the telling of the tale. The narrative abruptly shifts amongst multiple perspectives. Overall, the narrative form can be termed as a cyclical one. This shows that different spaces hold different values depending on which subjective consciousness the narrator is depicting at the moment. These spaces and chronotopes correspond to the book's narrative method of depicting the merging and flowing and creating of consciousness. One of the most basic things that we do with computational techniques is to analyze various linguistic patterns and other idiosyncrasies in a body of text. A set of stylometric techniques can help us to understand how authors' style change over time and how to determine the likely authorship of a text when the authorship is uncertain. Computational stylometry is the use of computers to measure the stylistic properties of texts. It is used for genre classification, diachronic linguistics, literary analysis, and authorship attribution. Stylometry is often employed to identify or confirm the authorship of texts, especially in cases where authorship is uncertain or disputed. Sentiment analysis techniques are used in conjunction with stylometry to study the emotional tone and mood conveyed in texts. This is particularly used when dealing with large data sets where manual categorization would be impractical. Most of the topics that we have discussed today, whether macroanalysis or distant reading, correspond to one or the other aspects of stylometry. Stylometry rests on many assumptions and formal aesthetics which cannot be covered over the course of this module today. However, we will discuss the concept of stylometric approaches further, look at its applications and examples in the coming module. We can say that the digital approaches to literary studies often reintroduce empiricism to the heart of literary scholarship. It brings us back from the brink of elaborate theorization and argumentation to a focus on the text itself. Such methods have been united under the term of descriptive criticism, which includes, on the one hand, surface reading, and on the other hand, distant reading and computational analysis. Computational approaches afford us alienation mechanisms that can allow us to understand literary works in greater detail. These methods can show us the longer scale literary histories within which individual works are situated and their invisible functions. In the next module, we will continue our discussion of stylometric analysis. We will also look into critical digital humanities as an interdisciplinary approach within the field of digital humanities, critiquing the assumptions, values, and power structures embedded in digital technologies and their applications also. Thank you.